I don't want to entertain people like you. You go away.
I don't want to cause trouble. I can eat somewhere else.
Sorry, sir, but we need this table for regular customers. Please leave, the manager said, loud enough for the whole restaurant to hear. The old man was stunned and reached for his crutch. No one said anything. No one intervened. The disabled U.S. Navy veteran fell out of his coat and lay silently on the floor. Only a disabled U.S. Navy veteran fell out of his coat, lying silently on the floor. Right at the next table, 3 men stood up silently, dressed in Navy uniforms, silently, and walked towards him. Welcome to QH. Let's find out what really happened. His name is Frank Miller, 78 years old, a former U.S. Navy officer. He lost his right leg from the knee down and had to walk on crutches. Living alone in a quiet suburb, Frank has a simple routine. Every Sunday lunch at a small restaurant near the gas station, table number 9 next to the window, with enough light to read the newspaper. He didn't want to be noticed. He dressed simply and wore his veteran's badge around his neck, not to show off, but to let people know when he was moving slowly or needed help. That day, he came as usual, but table number 9 was already taken. He chose table number 6 near the aisle. He ordered his meal of a cold sandwich, no cheese, and black coffee. The atmosphere was peaceful until a new manager appeared, tall with a stern face. "Sorry, sir. This table must be provided for regular customers. Can you move to the next section? Could you move to the back?" Frank didn't understand. "I've already ordered my food." The manager shrugged. "It's policy from upstairs. If you're not cooperative, I'll have to ask you to leave the restaurant." A few customers looked up, but no one intervened. The server turned away. Frank reached for his cane and stood up quietly. His veteran tag slipped off his neck and fell to the floor. The faded plastic card clearly stated he was a disabled Navy veteran from 1971. The restaurant had been Frank's refuge for 3 years. Every Sunday after church, he'd drive his old Honda to this modest diner for simple food and a quiet atmosphere. Ms. Thompson, the regular server, always treated him kindly. She knew his orders by heart and brought extra napkins without being asked. Understanding his shaky hands made eating a bit of a challenge. The new manager, Todd Jenkins, had just started the job 2 weeks ago. He was hired by the new chain that bought the restaurant to boost efficiency and profits. To Derek, Frank was exactly the kind of customer they needed to discourage. An elderly man moving slowly, taking up valuable table space without ordering anything pricey. What Derek didn't see was a man who had served 23 years in the Navy, including 2 tours in Vietnam, where he was wounded twice. What he didn't see was a man who had endured disabilities like his through serving his country. That veteran ID on the floor wasn't just an identification card. All Derek saw was an old man on crutches making other customers uncomfortable and not spending enough to justify the seat. It was proof that Frank's slow movements and careful navigation weren't character flaws. As Frank tried to stand, his pride still intact despite the burning humiliation in his chest, he noticed the 3 men at table number 7. They ate in silence throughout the first battle. They had been eating in silence throughout the confrontation. They were active Navy personnel in uniform, maybe on shore leave or attending an official event. Frank recognized the direction immediately. Frank recognized the bearing right away. Straight shoulders, alert eyes, the way they held themselves even while seated. One of them, a lieutenant commander, with his insignia, set down his fork and was watching the situation with growing attention. The other 2, a chief petty officer and a petty officer second class had also stopped eating. Not in a rush, not dramatically, but with the quiet determination of those who understood exactly what they were witnessing and refused to let it continue. The lieutenant commander stepped forward, his voice calm, but carrying unmistakable authority. Right next to Frank's table was table number 7. 3 men in Navy uniforms. They have been eating lunch in silence since arriving here. As the veteran's card fell to the floor, the man in the middle put down the knife and stood up. The other 2 immediately followed. The first man spoke to Frank. "Sir, please, have a seat." The manager frowned. "Sorry, gentlemen, this is none of your business." The second sailor turned back, his voice low but clear. "You've just asked a disabled veteran to leave right in front of 3 active Navy officers. So explain yourself before we call Homeland Security." The whole restaurant fell silent. The third man with the SEAL insignia stepped forward, picked up the ID, and placed it back in Frank's hand. "Thank you for keeping your oath." No one laughed. No one shouted, but the atmosphere froze solid. Lieutenant Commander Ethan Carter was celebrating with his team after a successful exercise. Chief Petty Officer Logan Reed and Petty Officer Second Class Owen Hayes were both SEALs under his command. These young men had proven themselves in combat and understood what true military duty meant. When they saw Frank enter the restaurant, they recognized something familiar in his demeanor. The way he carefully moved with his cane, the respectful nod to the server, the quiet composure despite his evident physical challenges. Veterans often spot each other, even in civilian clothes. But what turned their casual observation into decisive action was witnessing Todd Jenkins treat a fellow serviceman like an unwanted nuisance. Sir Monroe said to Derek, his voice carrying the authority of a seasoned commander, "Do you even understand what just happened here?" Derek's face flushed red with anger and embarrassment. "Hey, I don't care who you think you are. I'm the manager here, and I decide on seating arrangements." Chen stepped closer, his SEAL training evident in the precision of his movements. "We're the United States Navy. You're just discriminating against a disabled veteran." Rodriguez, the youngest of the 3 but no less impressive, added gently, "Sir, that man served this country for over 2 decades. He has the right to have lunch wherever he chooses." The server, Samantha, who had been watching the confrontation with growing horror, quickly brought the sandwich and coffee to Frank. "Mr. Ellis, please forgive us. Please sit down." Frank looked around at the 3 young sailors who had stood up for him at the other customers, now paying attention at Derek, who seemed to realize his authority meant nothing against military solidarity. "I don't want to cause any trouble," Frank said softly. "I can eat somewhere else." "No," Sir Monroe said firmly. "You shouldn't have to eat anywhere else. You've been here before. You ordered your meal, and you haven't done anything wrong except serve your country with honor." Derek could see the situation slipping out of his control. Other customers were pulling out their phones, some taking photos, others typing on social media. This was exactly the kind of incident that could ruin a restaurant's reputation overnight, but his pride wouldn't let him back down completely. "All right, he can stay this time, but in the future, I need advance notice for any special arrangements." Rodriguez, who had been quiet until now, stepped right up to Derek. "Sir, there's nothing special about treating a veteran with basic human respect. That should be standard procedure." An elderly woman at a nearby table had recorded parts of the confrontation on her phone. Within minutes, She posted it to a local veteran support group with the caption, "3 Navy heroes just stood up for an elderly veteran being mistreated. This is honor." Monroe placed a respectful hand on Frank's shoulder. "Sir, would you allow us the honor of joining you for lunch? We'd consider it an honor." Frank's eyes welled up, but he hid it by adjusting his glasses. In the 37 years since he left the service, no one had ever said they'd consider his company a privilege. That meant the world to him. The 3 sailors moved their plates and drinks to Frank's table, turning what started as a humiliating confrontation into something entirely different. A gathering of warriors from different generations, united by shared values and mutual respect. As they sat down, the other diners in the restaurant began to grasp what they were witnessing. This wasn't just a story of an old man being mistreated. It was the bond among all who had served no matter when or where. Todd Jenkins watched from behind the counter, finally starting to understand the gravity of his mistake. He had seen Frank as a problematic customer, but these active servicemen saw him as family. The restaurant owner, Mrs. Bennett, stepped out of the kitchen where she was prepping for the afternoon rush. When she saw the 3 Navy officers sitting with Frank and pieced together what had happened, her expression shifted from confusion to determination. She went straight to Derek and said quietly but firmly, "You need to come with me to the office right now." As Derek reluctantly followed Mrs. Bennett. Back at the table, Monroe turned to Frank with genuine interest. "Sir, if you don't mind me asking, what was your rank back in the Navy?" Frank smiled for the first time that day. "Corpsman, Hospital Marine Corps. 2 tours in Vietnam." The 3 SEALs exchanged looks of deep respect. They knew that Navy corpsmen serving with the Marines were among the bravest in military history. "Doc," Chen said quietly, using the traditional term of respect for Navy corpsmen, "this is surely an honor for us. I'll stand up too if you believe there are moments that demand it not to speak, but to refuse to stay silent." No one recorded the incident. No one posted it online, but the story spread faster than any viral video. The woman sitting 2 tables away had captured everything she witnessed and posted it on a local veterans forum with the title, "3 Men Stood Up." The post got 400,000 shares within 24 hours. One of the 3 sailors was Lieutenant Commander Ethan Carter of SEAL Team 2. When asked about the incident, he simply replied, not because he was a veteran, because he was the one who couldn't defend himself. Afterward, Frank was invited to a tribute ceremony at the local Naval Academy. The organizers were the same 3 sailors from that day. No microphones, no cameras, just a chair in the middle of the yard and a speech read by a cadet officer for a man who had once been asked to leave a table but never left his post. Frank just bowed his head, saying nothing. But after that day, he received over 300 handwritten letters from people he'd never met. A child sent him a handmade card. "Thank you for not giving up, even when others gave up on you." The story that started in a small diner touched something deeper than social media algorithms or viral content. It reminded people of a basic truth about respect service and the bonds among those who understand sacrifice. Lieutenant Commander Monroe received a call from his commanding officer 3 days after the incident. What he expected to be a routine check-in turned into something much more significant. "So, do you know what you did in that restaurant? Or did we just stand up for a veteran being mistreated? Son, you represented the United States Navy exactly as we hope our sailors will with honor, without seeking recognition and with absolute commitment to our values. The commanding officer continued, "The man you protected, I looked up his service record. Corpsman Frank Miller served 2 tours in Vietnam with the 3rd Marine Division. He was awarded the Silver Star for charging into enemy fire to treat wounded Marines. He saved 17 lives in that assault." Monroe felt a chill run down his spine. "Sir, he never mentioned that." Men like Corpsman Ellis rarely do. They see service as a duty, not something to brag about. That week, the story reached the highest levels of Navy command, not as a disciplinary issue, but as an example of the values they wanted to promote. The Secretary of the Navy personally reviewed the matter and sent a letter to Frank, not apologizing for civilian treatment, but expressing gratitude for how he maintained his dignity under pressure. Back at the restaurant, Mrs. Bennett was making changes that went far beyond firing Todd Jenkins. She grew up in a military family. Her father had served in the Indian Navy, and she understood the meaning of a uniform, no matter what flag it flew under. In my culture, she explained to her staff in an emergency meeting, "We have a saying, the customer is God." But when the customer is someone who served the country, their family, Mrs. Bennett immediately implemented new policies. Veterans will get priority seating. Military discounts will be expanded. Most importantly, all staff will be trained on recognizing and respecting service members. But the biggest change was designating table number 6. The table where Frank had been humiliated became the honor table. A small brass plaque was installed dedicated to those who had served and those who understood the meaning of service. That table never stayed empty for long. Active duty personnel, veterans, and their families started flocking there, creating an informal gathering spot for those with shared values. Frank still kept his Sunday routine, but he wasn't alone anymore. The 3 SEALs made it a tradition to join him for lunch, not as guards or protectors, but as true friends who enjoyed his company. Other veterans began joining them. Word spread in the military community that this little diner had become a place where service wasn't just tolerated, it was celebrated. A retired Marine artillery sergeant started coming every week. A Vietnam-era Air Force pilot began bringing his grandson. A female veteran from the Iraq War found a place where her service was recognized and respected. The weekly gatherings grew from 4 people to sometimes 20 or more. Mrs. Bennett eventually dedicated a section of the restaurant to what regulars called the Veterans Corner. Local news outlets heard about the weekly meetups and requested interviews. The veterans politely declined all requests. Frank explained to a persistent reporter that some things mean more when they're not performed for the cameras. "We're not here to be an example. We're here to be a community." 6 months after the initial incident, Todd Jenkins applied for a job at a competing restaurant. In the interview, the manager asked why he left his previous position. Derek paused for a long moment before answering honestly, "I made a serious judgment error. I didn't treat a customer with basic human dignity, and I've learned a hard lesson that respect isn't optional." He wasn't hired, but the experience taught him something valuable about the consequences of his actions. Meanwhile, the restaurant where it all began had become something special. Not just a place to eat, but a spot where values of service, respect, and community were lived out daily. A young Navy recruit fresh out of boot camp heard about the diner from his instructor and stopped by during leave. He saw Frank sitting at his usual table surrounded by friends from various generations of service. Corman Ellis, the young sailor, asked cautiously, "I've heard about what happened here, about what you did in Vietnam. I just wanted to say thank you." Frank looked up at the young, sincere face and saw himself 50 years ago, full of hope, ready to serve, uncertain of what lay ahead. "Son," Frank said gently, "just do your job well. That's all any of us can do." The recruit nodded and left, but not before placing a small American flag pin on the table, his small contribution to a legacy that had grown far beyond a moment of disrespect. The story had become bigger than the incident that started it. It became a reminder that dignity, respect, and community aren't abstract concepts. They're choices we make every day, especially when no one's watching. And sometimes, when good people make the right choices at the right time, they create something that lasts longer than any viral video. The manager changed table number 6, where Frank had been asked to leave, into the honor table. No one sat there by chance, but there was always a cup of coffee placed there with a small plaque for those who had been asked to leave but stayed with grace. Frank still came every week, but he chose different tables. He left it as is, not for himself, but for the memories. New staff were specially trained not just in skills, but in history. Anyone who had served got priority seating if they had ID. A customer asked, "Why do you do that?" The server replied, "Because here we don't wait for society to teach us how to show respect." The honor table wasn't just furniture, it had become a symbol. Other veterans began making pilgrimages to see it and understand its meaning. Mrs. Bennett noticed that Sunday lunches had completely transformed. Her slowest days had become her busiest, with military families, veterans, and people who just wanted to be part of something meaningful. "It's strange," she said to her assistant manager. "We're making more money than ever." But that was never the point. The assistant manager, a former Navy officer himself, nodded. "Ma'am, when you honor service, service honors you back." 3 months after the incident, a group of high school students visited the diner on a field trip. Their teacher, a Marine veteran, brought them there to see the honor table and hear the story behind it. "This is where you learn that defending what's right doesn't need permission." He told them, "Sometimes you just need to stand up." One student asked, "What happened to the manager who treated the old man badly?" The teacher paused for a moment before reflecting. He learned that every action has consequences, and sometimes those consequences teach us how to be better people. Frank overheard the conversation from a nearby table and quietly approached the group. "Kids," he said gently, "what matters isn't what happened to him. What matters is what you choose to do when you see someone treated unfairly." A young girl raised her hand. "But what if we're scared?" Frank smiled. "Fear is normal. Courage means doing the right thing, even when you're afraid." The teacher took a photo of Frank with his students, not for social media, but to hang on the classroom wall. Later, she told her colleagues that her students learned more about courage in that diner than from any textbook. 6 months later, Todd Jenkins, the former manager, returned to the diner not to eat, but to speak with Mrs. Bennett. "I want to apologize," he said simply, and asked if I could volunteer here, maybe help serve meals to veterans on holidays. Mrs. Bennett studied his face. "Why?" "Because I need to understand what I didn't before, and maybe, just maybe, I can make sure it never happens to anyone else. She agreed on one condition: Derek would work unpaid shifts at Veterans Appreciation events. He would listen to their stories. He would learn what respect looks like in action, not just in theory. The first veteran Derek served was Frank, who looked up from his Sunday paper with surprise. "I remember you," Frank said quietly. Derek's hand shook as he poured the coffee. "Yes, sir. I'm the one who asked you to leave." Frank nodded slowly. "And now you're asking to serve. That's redemption." From that day on, Derek worked every Sunday serving coffee to veterans and learning their names, stories, and sacrifices. He never forgot the lesson Frank taught him without saying a word. Some changes happen quietly, one cup of coffee at a time, one act of service leading to another. The honor table remained unoccupied but full of meaning, a reminder that sometimes the most important seats are reserved for principles, not people. No one knew what Frank Miller did during his service. No one asked what he had witnessed, and he never told them. He just lived quietly like so many others. But sometimes the quietest people make the world stop and listen. Being asked to leave his table at the diner didn't break him. What made others bow their heads was the way he stood up without raising his voice. And those 3 sailors that day, they didn't do anything extraordinary. They just stood up at the right time to prove a simple truth: a soldier never eats lunch alone. The honor table had become a landmark in the community. Visitors came from other cities to see it, to understand what it represented, not the furniture itself, but the principles it embodied. A year later, Frank received an invitation to speak at the Naval Academy graduation. He politely declined as always, but instead, he sent a letter that was read aloud to the graduating class. To the young sailors beginning their service, you'll face moments when you have to choose between what's easy and what's right. Choose what's right, not for recognition, not for rewards, but because someone before you made that choice for you. Honor isn't something you wear on your uniform. It's something you demonstrate through your actions, especially when no one's watching. 3 years after the incident, Frank passed away peacefully in his sleep. His funeral was attended by hundreds, most of whom he had never met, but whose lives had been touched by his story. The honor table at the diner was draped with an American flag for a week. Visitors left flowers, coins, and handwritten notes. Todd Jenkins, now a full-time volunteer coordinator for Veteran Services, placed a simple card on the table. "Thank you for teaching me that respect isn't given, it's earned, and once earned, it should never be questioned." The table remains there to this day, still unoccupied but still purposeful. A reminder that sometimes the strongest words are the ones never spoken, and the most important battles are won simply by refusing to sit still when others need you to stand up. Subscribe if you believe there are moments when just standing up is enough to change everything. This is a story from QH Incredible Stories, where honor doesn't need amplification to be heard.